Let's begin, and welcome everybody to my talk. Today we are going to talk about HTTP performance, benchmarking, and also what's going on in the JVM and in protocols for performance. First of all, thanks Devoxx for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's been a few years I haven't been there, and it's great to see and join the Java community. So, who am I? Quickly, I'm French, and I'm coming from Marseille, where I'm Java user group leader. And also, I'm, of course, a software developer, like I hope most of you here. And basically, to summarize my career, I started to contribute open source in 2003, like 15 years ago. And I'm still doing that. And now I'm working for Red Hat to develop the project Vertex, which is a project of the Eclipse Foundation. And that's about it. You can follow me on the various social media that are, if you are interested. So today, this is a blog post that was published in 2013 by a company called Tech Empower. I don't know if you heard about it or not, but basically, what does this blog post did and what did they do is that they created a benchmark to benchmark HTTP servers, basically. And what is the reason of that? The reason is that when you will choose a web stack for your applications, the performance of this web stack will have impact on your business. We all heard the stories of applications written in a different language or ported to another platform because the performance were a problem. We all know that also performance matters for user experience, and most of the time people just quit the web page after 2 seconds. Well, that's I think you are like this also. And so they did that, and what is interesting in this benchmark, there are two interesting things. The first one is that it's not only Java, it's actually for all languages and all platforms. So in the benchmark, you can find Java, PHP, Go, Rust, etc., etc. And the second interesting thing is that this benchmark was published on GitHub. It means that you can take the benchmark, run it on your own hardware, make up your mind, or you can even contribute to it. So if you have your own HTTP server and you want it to be part of the benchmark, you can just make a pull request, and that's it. And after that, there was a community that was created, and people started to add new benchmarks, and that's it. So what is interesting here is that let's review now the framework benchmark itself, the requirements for the benchmark. So there are about, what is interesting is that there are 5 tests. 2 tests, they really benchmark the HTTP server alone, I mean with no backend. And the 3 other tests, they will also benchmark the backend with the database. There are some strict requirements, like what things you cannot do, things you can do. For instance, if you are doing HTTP with a database, you cannot use cache because basically you want to test the setup of the HTTP server plus the SQL client or whatever client you use for accessing the database. The benchmark is run physical and also in cloud. And what is also interesting is that, of course, today, 2013 was 6 years ago, so a lot of people have contributed a lot of benchmarks. So today it's about between 400 and 500 frameworks, because when I published that, it was like last year, so I think there are more, right? What is interesting also is that there is continuous benchmarking. It means that before, when you publish a benchmark, you make a pull request, you run it on your own hardware, and you say, okay, everything is fine, it's running fine. But when you publish it, you will know how it performs in the benchmark conditions when they actually do it. And now there is a continuous benchmarking, which means that when you submit it every day or every 2 days, there is a new benchmark that is run. So when you modify something, like you upgrade a version of a library or something, you can see the impact on it, and that's really interesting. So in this presentation, we will not use, this benchmark is about the Vertex experience and how we improved Vertex performance based on this benchmark. So I will not talk directly about Vertex. I will not, I mean, it's not a Vertex presentation, unfortunately. But I will nevertheless quickly say what it is. So Vertex, it's a set of libraries, we call it Toolkit, that you use to write non-blocking and reactive applications. It's running on the JVM. And basically, we provide an ecosystem of non-blocking libraries. We not only provide HTTP server, HTTP client, but provide connectors for SQL, for Kafka, and everything. We provide monitoring. And so, as I said, it's very simple to use. You can embed it. The main difference with traditional applications is that often these applications, the servers, they start for you on HTTP server. In Vertex, as it's a library, it's manual. You have to start your own server. You can start many if you want. So I mean, that's just a bit paradigm shift that is a bit different. So we are not going to talk about Vertex itself. Nevertheless, there is this book that is being an effort being written for a few months. I don't know. I see it should be final next year, and you can purchase it. And today there is this code, and so it's a like free plug. And most importantly, if you care about it, and if you tweet and mention Vertex project in this presentation, you can. We have 5 codes to make win. So after we will make a lottery of the tweets, and we will win do giveaways. So let's start the story. So this is what Vertex. This is round 8 in 2013. So it was one of the first rounds. So I forgot to say that there is continuous benchmarking today, but periodically they take a snapshot of performance, and what they do is that it becomes a round and it becomes published on the website. So in 2013, Vertex was working very well, was very highly ranked. It was actually the most performant web server at this moment. And a few years later, in round 14, we can see that Vertex performance dropped, and now it's not anymore the first one, it's like the 15th place. So what happens? And that's what we are going to talk about in this presentation. And also, another thing is that if you look here at the performance, we can see at line 42 and 33 that Vertex with MongoDB it has performance, it's like 20% of the best. That's what means. Basically, the first one is 100%, and then the percentage shows how fast you are compared to the best. And for even some tests we have, like MongoDB, also that's another test, it's not the same database test. It was like, you can see it's written did not complete. So it means the benchmark did not complete in the time it was allocated to run. And so what happens is that Vertex had great performance, and a few years later it was not so good anymore. And so so that's taken from our mailing list. If you go on the mailing list, you can find the actual messages. And people started to wonder what happened. It said Vertex seems to be sliding downward the list. Or another one said stats are not really good for Vertex. Is Vertex not good with database, or the benchmark are wrong? And that's interesting because the guy did not say Vertex has problems. He said maybe that's a benchmark. There was an open question that you had to answer here. So let's review a few important points about benchmarking. And I would say it's not methodology, but it's more like rule of thumbs and obvious things. I mean, for some, I'm going to be Captain Obvious here. So first, I want to say that benchmarking is not a simulation. So some of you are used to maybe to do load testing of your applications, with virtual users and the session and everything. Benchmarking is really about doing something smaller and try to go as fast as possible. If you have a car, it's like you take your car and you don't go shopping. You just go on a race and you race against the other. Measured on guess, of course, you need to have a reproducible process to where you run the benchmark in a proper environment, like isolated if you can. Don't run, often people do that, is that they run benchmarks on their own machine, so everything on local host. And of course, it's not a real experience of what happens in reality, so these benchmarks, we can't really say much about them. Use a baseline. It means that when you start benchmarking, you define a baseline, which is what you will compare to. And often the goal is to reach this baseline or to be above, or it depends. But you need to define that, otherwise you, you cannot compare, of course. And define expectations. Here again, it's obvious when you are going to do a benchmark, you need to define what is your goal. Otherwise, you will never end. And good luck. In this presentation, actually, in reality, when we did that, we used a few tools. You have the luck on the JVM to have great tools for performance. So that we have profilers, we have another tool that is called JITWatch, we have flame graphs. We are going to see a bit of them in this presentation. It's not a presentation about these tools, of course, but I will try to do my best to help to make you understand how we can use them. So for profilers, there are many profilers on the JVM. I'm not a profiler expert. I just know that there are some profilers you can trust, and there are some you can't. If you go with Async Profiler or PerfDtrace, it will be great. You will get the best, the most reliable results you can trust, because when you have the results, you can trust. And even with these tools, when you analyze, you need to be skeptical about it and see, because sometimes, there are some issues. It's not in the tools, it's more in the way we measure them. And we are going to use also, with these tools, we can create flame graphs. So what is interesting about flame graphs? Flame graph is not, it's mostly a visualization tool. It's a tool that you use. Basically, there are a lot of information about it, and if you don't make sense of these informations, if you can't have a tool to interpret them, you will not see what is important to see. And the other tools I've been using is a tool called JITWatch. And this tool is great too. Basically, we are going to talk about some parts of this talk is about specific JVM performance. And the Java runtime has something called the JIT that takes your bytecode and translates it into a assembly. And this tool, basically, it helps us also to make sense and understand what is going on and what are the decisions that have been taken by the JVM to do that. And that, of course, has an impact on the performance. So let's start with the plain text benchmark. So this benchmark is very simple. It's a synchronous response. Basically, if you do a servlet or whatever, you just respond hello world, and that's it. There is one caveat, is that you have to send an HTTP header with the current date. So that's to validate that you not always reply with the same response. And what is also interesting here is that you have something called HTTP pipelining, and I will go back on this later. But basically, it's a way to stress more, to put more stress on the server and more load. And then this benchmark is run with between 256 and 16K connections, and we take the best result. So you see only 2 involved, very simple test. So the first thing I learned is that you need to batch flushes appropriately to amortize costs. So that's the typical situation with pipelining. So on the left, we have HTTP keep alive. HTTP keep alive means that the client will open a connection to the server and keep it and reuse it. And the main reason is that it's because creating an HTTP connection, a TCP connection, is very expensive. It takes a lot of time, and if we don't do that, it's a problem for performance, even in browsers. And pipelining is different. Basically, the pipelining is that usually when you have the browser or the client has one connection, it uses the connection to send a request, and then it waits for the response to come back before reusing this connection. It means that during the transport of the buffers from the client to the server, and during the service time of the server, and the response comes back, the HTTP connection is not used at all. It doesn't do anything. And with pipelining, what we do is that if you have a lot of requests to send, instead of waiting to have the response back, we send already the new requests. So it saves a bit of time, and of course it allows to increase the concurrency and put more load on the server. Of course, in practice, most people don't do that. That's something that is not encouraged, and browsers don't do it. Instead, they open 6 connections, or they use HTTP2 now. But for this benchmark, that's the opinionated way this benchmark has been created. And so in Keep Alive, by default, if you don't do pipelining, I mean, if you do pipelining with by default, and basically what we do is that we flush the HTTP response. So basically we get 3 requests, for instance, like we have seen here. And we send 3, so everything usually comes in a single TCP packet, or a few, and it's handled quickly by Nelly, because Vertex is based on Nelly. And then if we take and we write the responses, each response separately, and we flush, we have these results. So we see that with pipelining 1, it means it's the default. It's like Keep Alive. So we have a baseline of 60K requests per second. And then pipelining 2, it means we send two requests up to pipelining 8. And we see that, of course, it concurrency increase. We are able to do more requests per second, but it doesn't increase that much. I mean, we could expect a better increase. So let's look now quickly at a flame graph. So I hope it's large enough for you. So what is a flame graph? Flame graph is it's this visualization tool that is great, and what we can see here is that there is a stack trace. So that's a Java stack trace, and from on the horizontal axis, we are not talking about time. So you take time and take it out of the equation. What is important here is that the largest something is, the more resources it's consuming. And so, of course, if you look at the bottom of the stack, it's Java long thread run, which is basically the thread running of our server. And then we can see everything that consumes resources, that consumes CPU. And when we flush on each request, here it's very obvious to see with this tool. We can see that so at the bottom, when basically here, if we can magnify it, if I click here, now I have a better view of what happens. We see that when we flush, so basically when the frame, I can go here. When we call end means in the application I end the HTTP request, the response. We can see that here we spend 46% of the time in system calls. And the reason is that doing flush and system calls in Java is expensive. So if we flush on each request, we do more flush than necessary. And so here, the thing we can do is we can improve that, and instead of sending three flushes, we just aggregate all the responses in a single packet, and we flush this buffer to the network. And thanks to that, now we are able to get much better performance. You can see that now at pipelining 8, I have a ratio of 5 to 6 times better between pipelining 1 and pipelining 8. We can quickly show now the same flame graph that was done with a flush, with appropriate flushes. And we see now that here the flush, we take only 16% of the CPU time spent there. So it's a very good win. It might not seem a lot, but it's a lot in practice, as you can see. Second, keep your method small to ease method inlining. So this code, and you even have the hash code of the commit. This is a commit that was done in Vertex, and when we committed that, our CI was doing benchmarking, and we saw like between 3 to 5% penalty regression in performance when that was added. And if you look carefully at the code, you can see that this code is actually never executed by when you run an HTTP server request. basically it's an error. Basically, I think we fixed a bug and we had like a wrong handling of some HTTP server code, and we changed it so we added more lines of code to handle appropriately the fixes. And so the question is why this code that is never executed that we added created a penalty regression. And here, to understand what is going on, we need to look a bit in JIT. So JIT is, as I've said before, you have the JVM, you load classes, the classes are executed, they contain bytecode. This bytecode is by default interpreted, and when this bytecode is on the hot path, it means it's executed a lot, then it's compiled directly into machine code on the fly by the JVM. And of course, there are various kinds of optimizations, like method inlining, loop hoisting, dead code eliminations. And today we are going to focus more on method inlining, because method inlining is one of the most important aspects to understand when you optimize for JIT. Basically, method inlining is that you take one method, let's say my method A calls B, and you take the body of the B methods, and you simply copy it in the body of the A methods. And what is interesting here is that, of course, you save a call, but also method inlining is important because it opens the door to more optimization, like inlining fields and such. So that's why it's very important. So this is the code that was we are talking about. Now we have a full version of it. Of course, it's barely readable for you. But before, let's look at how the tools can help us. So first, we do have here a new flame graph. So it's more or less the same flame graph than before. We measure the same thing, but in this flame graph, we do something special. We use different colors, and we ask the flame graph to say everything that was inlined, it's in blue, and everything that is not inlined, it's in green. So of course, the more blue we have, the better it is, right? So when we studied it, we found that here in this part, in this area, which is often called, here we have a lot of green. We are missing blue. Like we could have a better inlining. And to understand that, we can use this tool. So JITwatch. So we are going to use it quickly. So how does it work? So first, let's look at the code. So I'm opening it. So we are not going to look at a lot of code, actually. Here, this is the HTTP server we use. So it's a simple server, but it's more or less what we do have in TechCamp Performance Benchmark. And you can see the code here. I can make it larger with the tool. And basically what we do is that we do a response, and that's it. But what is more interesting here is that the tool we are going to use, so when we run this benchmark, we run the JVM with a special, no, that's not what I want to see. I click on the wrong file, so I can see the SVG. Here, this is when we run the JVM, so we use some special flags like preserve frame pointer. Some are for optimizations, and basically there are some. We are not going to look at them, but what will happen is that the JVM will log a lot of information, and this information that's the JIT that emits it. So then we can use JITwatch. Basically, JITwatch takes this log and gives you an UI to make sense of these logs. Because of course you can look at the logs if you want, but like you can have a small look at the logs. Like you see, it's basically it says I load classes. You even have assembly code. If you have the proper plugin, you can even see the assembly code that was created by the JIT. And some extremely talented guys use it to improve that. And what I'm going to do now is, no, it's exec Java. I'm going to use the JITwatch plugin. So it's if you use Maven, I'm using a simple When it's not a Maven plugin, it's simple Java, but I run it with Maven. If we look at it, it's JITwatch. That's what I run. I use the exact Maven plugin, and I run the launch UI part of it. And so what? Yes, I forgot to do something. I need to compile the program first, not to run it, but to get the sources, because JITwatch will need the sources to show you and reason about. I mean, the logs are not enough. It needs the log and the source code to work. So let's run it again. So I'm going to take this one, 342 log, and now I process it. So I can make it larger, like this. I think the UI is in it's not Swing, it's another Java UI, and it's very hard. It's not flexible. I mean, it's not like JavaFX. Okay, it's JavaFX, but I mean it's very nice. But in presentation, it's hard to scale. So what we can see here, there are a lot of informations we can have. We are not going to review, but for instance, you have like, you can have access, yes, to the histogram, to the cache. So with that, you are able to know what the JIT does, what it compiled, if the cache is full or not, and that's very important. But here we see we can have all the Java packages of what we have. And if you go back on the flame graph, we are going to look at this part here. So it's because I did that. HTTP server, do message received, Vertex HTTP handlers, that's what we want to see. And here I can find it again. And no, it's not the right one. It's this one. So when I click on it, now I see the methods, and these methods, they are checked as green. It means they have been compiled to assembly code, which is expected because this is what our benchmark runs, and it means that they were effectively compiled by the JIT. Now when I click on it, I have more information. As I provided the source code, I have access to the actual source code, and that's what we have in the slide. Also, I have access to the bytecode, and on the right, I have access to the assembly code that was emitted. And what we care about here, actually, it's not this. Well, we could, but we don't. We want to see the compile chain. And basically, this shows what the JIT has done. And so when it's red, it means it's good. It has been compiled to assembly. When it's green, it means it's great, because it means that the code was compiled to assembly and inline in the code. And here we see the same thing that we've seen in the flame graph. We see the process message. But now what is interesting is that also JITwatch will give us the information that was created in the log. That would have been very hard to find, and it will tell us why this is not inlined. So if we go on the methods, we can see a tooltip. And indeed, it says inlined. No. Why? Because the hot method was too big. And some of you may have guessed it. Let's go back on the slides. This method is actually too big. So what it is that when we added this new error handling code, the methods became bigger and was not inline anymore. And of course, the JIT, to work properly, has limitations. It means inlining seems cool, but the question is, can we inline everything? And the answer is no. There must be limitations. Like, for instance, if you have a recursive methods, it's not possible for the JIT to inline it. Or if you have too long depths of stack calls, it will not be inline either, and also the method size. Here, this is the method size. So what we have done is pretty easy. So that's the processor code. So this code is only called when, for instance, there is an error in the HTTP request, like I have a malformed HTTP request, an header contains doesn't have a value or something like this. This is actually the code that interests us. That code processes the request and calls the application. And the last part is process body. It's when we receive the body chunk. So basically, this code also is not called because the benchmark does get requests and not put, so there is no body called. So what we did here is that we simply refactored this code in handle error methods. Here we refactored this in handle content methods. So we do that so we improve the likelihood to have this method inline into the other one. And for the last one, what we did is that we didn't extract it in a separate methods. We could have done it, and likely when we run it, the JIT will inline it too. But as I said, there are limitations. When you have a too long def stack, it will not inline. So if we don't add a method that could be inlined, we don't add an extra step, and we favor inlining in the other parts of the stack. All right. The last one for the JIT and the HTTP server, it's avoid unnecessary allocations to reduce GC pressure. So now let's look at some code that you have in Vertex. If you are familiar with Netty, you might understand what it is. Basically, this is the one integration part between Vertex and Netty that we have. And so we have this code. So here we have two things. We have the channelry methods. And as you can see, the channelry methods call the context interface execute from I/O. So that's an important part in Vertex, basically, when we switch from Netty to Vertex, and when we execute code in this context, some errors will be reported, some checks will be done, so that's very important. And so that's something that is a lot on the hot path, of course. And the original implementation of this was using a Java Lambda. And basically, what is the problem here? The problem is that we instantiate a Lambda for each call. The Lambda may seem like a vanilla Lambda, but in practice, as we can see, it makes a reference to the message that is outside, that is provided in the channel methods. To find that, we can also, again, use flame graphs. So you will tell me, OK, is it the right one? Is this one? No, it's this one. Is it the right flame graph? Flame graph normally is used to what we have done so far with flame graphs is to look at CPU execution. And of course, it's a great tool for CPU execution. But flame graphs, as I said, is a visualization tool. It means you can visualize a lot of things. And here, with Async Profiler, when you run it, by default, you can measure and create flame graphs for CPU. But you have a mode where you can basically see allocation hotspots, which is very helpful because it tells you what your application is instantiating more. And when we run it, we got this result, and you can look at various allocations, and most of them are legit. I mean, at some point, when you receive a HTTP request, you have to take the data, create headers, process it, and create new instances. For instance, if we look here, we can see that this part is Netty, and Netty here, for instance, is allocating headers, and it's normal. If we don't do it, we don't have the header information, and the application cannot work. And if we go back, so what we did is that this previous allocation hotspot, how we found it is that here we have this. No, it's not the right one. It's this one. I'm not sure. Yes, I am on the allocation frame graph. So let me find it. Yes, it's this one. You see, it's really a tiny part that is hidden, but yet it was an allocation hotspot. And here we can see that indeed in the channel read complete, here we invoke here, and we create, this is the creation and the instantiation of the Lambda. We can see Vertex handler, $lambda, $68. And that is an anonymous class, kind of, that was created by the JVM to instantiate the Lambda. So basically, when we run this code, when channel read is executed, when it executes context from I/O, it will take this Lambda and create a new instance, so it can reference the message object that was provided. So what we did is that, what is the way to solve that? And the way we found is that We modified the context interface, and now context from IO accept a message argument. And of course, now it's not anymore unrunnable. It's a consumer of this argument. And now the code became this. We provide the message, and then the message is given back to the Lambda, and then the Lambda can continue to do it, to process it. And thanks to that, we are able to avoid this allocation. In fact, what we can do too is move this code, move this Lambda as a field to ensure that it's not accessing anything else from the methods. So basically, I would say it's a static Lambda. I don't know if there is a name for that. So let's conclude on this part. What we have seen is minimize flushing, important. Optimize for the JIT, that's something you can do. So that will improve CPU. The first one improves networking. And the last one is it's more something you do, is keep GC cool, because if you avoid, every allocation, GC is great, but if you can avoid to allocate things, it's great because you save future work. So what those results give, so at 115, now Vertex is better. We are ranked 11. So we are not as fast as before because there are a lot of contenders. But basically what is interesting here is that we are as fast as Nelly. And basically Vertex is using Nelly. So the question is, can we be faster than Nelly? And the answer is likely not. It could be, it could not be, but basically Vertex will by default for this benchmark will always have a performance that is similar to Nelly. So now let's talk about database benchmarks. So for these benchmarks, there are 4 benchmarks: DB, queries, fortunes, and updates. Each one is a bit different. For this benchmark, you have the choice between MySQL, Postgre, or Mongo. Basically, there is no recommendation. You use whatever is the best for you. And there are exactly 256 connections, which is a lot less than HTTP pipelining, that can go up to 16K connections. So at 114, what did we see? We see that JDBC, what we saw is that JDBC plus Ekari CP, which is a connection pool, gives the best performance in Java. And at this moment, Vertex was also using JDBC with a worker pool to use the same driver. And what we saw also is that blocking is actually not an issue. So we have Vertex, it's a non-blocking framework library. It can scale up to a lot, but if you only use 256 connections and you have a good server, basically it's a very small concurrency. So non-blocking will never be interesting here. It will actually, in practice, it will even be slower because that's the way things are. So handling the problem, how did we do that? First, we choose to focus on PostgreSQL. We also found that the very bad results we have seen initially were due to mistakes, like we were missing a MongoDB $ID for index, no usage of a transaction in updates, and these kind of things were causing the benchmarks not to complete. So what we did is that we wanted to understand what is going on and why we can't beat JDBC, the current implementation. So we started to write our own client for Postgre. And the goal was to be a simple, clean, and straightforward API, non-blocking, performance, very lightweight. And non-goals was to be a driver or an abstraction, so something very concrete. And that's what we did. And what we found we could do during with this client is that we could apply the techniques we have seen of pipelining. So we have seen before that pipelining in the benchmark with HTTP allows to set more concurrency on the benchmark. It means we can handle more requests per second. And if you look at how are designed database protocols, it's a bit similar to HTTP. You make a command, you send packets, and then you get a response, and that's it. So the question is, and usually you do it the same way as an HTTP. So you do your request, then you get the response, you give the results to the application, and then the application makes a new request and will use it, etc., etc. And what we did is that we applied the the pipelining techniques to increase concurrency on Postgres as well. And that gives us great results. I mean, even greater than we expected initially. So that's a benchmark, our own benchmark of executing 5,000 queries. So the benchmark is really stupid. It takes one connection, execute 5,000 queries, and wait for the results. And we can see that, of course, the reactive client and JDBC, if you use pipelining one, they are very close. But if we start to use pipelining, of course, JDBC, it's always the same because it doesn't support pipelining. But in the client we have, pipelining gives us like 3 times better, I would say, roughly. And that is done when the latency between the client and the server is 100 milliseconds. If we run the same benchmark on now with a latency of 1 millisecond between the client and the server, we can see that the effect of pipelining is much more important. And basically what happens here, and what is key is that in this case, the latency of executing the query on the server is much lower than the round trip between the RTT between the client and the server. So is pipelining a silver bullet? It's not. It can be in some cases, and the case is that your service time on the server has to be much lower than the latency. In this case, pipelining is a win because, of course, you save this round trip time, so you better use the TCP connections and also the number of resources and the number of connections that Postgre provides. Of course, I believe most of you know that when you have a connection pool, you need to define a size, and this size is very important for performance. And basically, with the same size of a connection pool, using pipeline queries in some situations like this, it provides better performance, better concurrency. So where did that really help? Yes, and what was great is that at round 15, Vertex Postgre was ranked #1, so better than, I mean, performing better than all the other frameworks on the website. So that was a great achievement for us. We can see here that first, #1 is Vertex Postgre, #5 is Vertex Web Postgre, which is more or less Vertex, but using some web framework on top of it. What was also interesting is that in the CI, that's a result a snapshot I did from the unofficial. So I said unofficial because it's not published on the website. It's something I did using the CI, and when I looked at the results, at some point I looked at what are now the best Java frameworks using Postgre. So when you go on the website, you can filter, and I click the box Java and Postgre. And you can see that the first one is Green Lightning, the second is Vertex Postgre, of course, Wizard HTTP, Ratpack Client, Vertex Postgre, Micronauts, Spring Reflux PG Client. And what is, if you look at all these benchmarks at this moment, I don't know today how it is, you will see that all these benchmarks were using directly or indirectly the Vertex PG Client. And that's what they are. Basically, that to take the PG Client to be competitive again and have the same results than Vertex Postgre was having. So now where are we with this PG client? Now this code was actually an experiment we did based on Vertex. Now this code has been imported back in the Vertex code base. It's called the Reactive SQL client. It's part of the Vertex stack since 3.8, and now we support more databases, Postgre, now we support MySQL, and soon we will have support for SQL Server. And so now we are reaching the conclusion. So what happened then after that in the story? So when we did that, of course, when you become the #1, and you perform greater than the others, and by a large margin, because using pipelining really gives us like much better than the others. People start, of course, to look at what you do, and they want to understand why Vertex went from this 20% of the best to being the new best. So people start to look at it and what we do. And some people, so then they send emails on this list. As I told you, Tech Empower has a GitHub repository where you can commit everything, and there is a community around it. And there is also a Google group where you can discuss and ask questions when you implement your benchmark. And in this case, in the benchmark, people started to wonder if pipelining doesn't infringe the rules that are set up when you use the benchmark. So there were several ones. So the guy says, it sounds like a violation of the round-trip requirements, but then the guy was still positive, which was great. He said, but it's a cool feature. So I was like, okay, maybe we need to remove it. There's some suspense here. But the guy said it's a cool feature, so it's positive. And then Tech Empower officially sent this email and it says, in summary, you are leaning toward prohibiting pipelining, but they remain open. They said if there are more opinions, we'd like to hear them. So they didn't close the door like they were initially thinking to prohibit it. And finally, they decided to allow it after all because some other people said, okay, if pipelining... Basically, they said that pipelining was a cool feature, and it was not cheating. Like cheating will be aggregate everything in a single TCP packet and send it and have better performance. And what we do in the client is that we pipeline the client the request, and they might be aggregated in the same TCP packet, but that's more a side effect of the network kernel and the TCP stack you have in the OS. And at the end, they said we have decided to allow pipelining, and they changed the rules basically. And now, when you submit a benchmark, you can use pipelining, and it's legal. Actually, if you look at database like Redis, most Redis clients have been using pipelining for many years and successfully. So that's just the conclusion. However, basically, now, if you go in the rules, there is one that says, however, it is permissible to pipeline traffic between the application and the database as a network level optimization. So to conclude, what did we learn? What I learned, at least, is that first I thought that non-blocking designs were actually a cool thing, and for benchmark, it will make a difference. And my surprise is that in this benchmark, it does not, because either it's synchronous, and it has up to 16K connections, but it's synchronous, so non-blocking doesn't make any sense because we don't use a backend. And when a backend is used, it's only 256 connections. So that was something unexpected. I learned personally also to use that the JVM has a lot of tools that you have seen and that you can use too. Like JITwatch, Async Profiler, etc., etc. And really, it's really great to work with these tools. There are also some trade-off between usability and performance. By that, I mean that when you have a web framework, if it's complex, it's going to add overhead. And if it's simple, you will lack of usability. And it will be more. It might be more performance, but it will lack of usability. And what I think we achieve in Vertex is that we have a good balance between usability and performance. So we try to find the good balance so to deliver you the most usable API and also the most performant one. And the last point is that we have seen all these optimizations in the JVM or even in the OS. But at the end of the day, what really was a game changer and what really made a difference is the database protocols. So if we look at it, we have HTTP1, and pipelining improved performance HTTP1. And what was the solution of that is HTTP2, because HTTP2 makes a better usage. With a single TCP connection, you can multiplex several requests concurrently on the same TCP connection. And today, at least that's my belief, what I found is that database protocols were basically mainly designed during the 80s when they didn't have the scalability problems. And we are still using the same protocols. We don't have an HTTP2 of for connecting with the database, which means for performance, you are still relying, on this connection pool and things, and it looks like things don't evolve. So protocol concurrency matters, and that's very important. A few links if you are interested to have more information about what I said. And that's it. Do you have any question? Oh.
Is it ahead of line blocking a bigger problem if you pipeline or database protocol? Because if somebody does a very slow select as a query before you, you are waiting for them.
That's true. So I will rephrase first the question. The question is, so basically, when you pipeline, of course, it's not magic. It's not like HTTP that is multiplexed. And when we have one request and you have other requests pending in the same queue, I would say, if this first request is taking a lot of time, the other request will not be processed. So this effect is called head-of-line blocking, and it's very common not only in HTTP but also in TCP, in everything that uses a connection, basically. And yes, and if you use a database, if you have a very long query, it will also block the others. So it's not magic. It doesn't solve this problem. That's why I said we should have an HTTP2 for like protocols, multiplex protocols for database would be great. As I said, pipelining makes a difference when the requests are very short. Like for instance, let's say you are just doing an insert. I think it's a good use case. It doesn't apply to everything, but in some, and in practice, we have some users that are using the ZPG client in production, and they found that it was doing great results in some use case, better performance and better stability. Another question? Yeah.
Once Project Loom is being released in the JDK, do you believe that this React framework still make any sense?
Okay, interesting question. So once Loom is released, do you believe that reactive frameworks will still make sense? And the question is, I have no answer for now. We don't know exactly what Project Loom does. When we do, but they keep changing the implementation, so we cannot really speculate. I mean, that will be very speculative. My opinion is that in Vertex will try to use it, and I think we can do great things with it. And eventually, we provide synchronous, I would say, a synchronous API instead of a reactive API. Under the hood, it might still be an IO. It really depends on what they will do in Loom in the JDK. And at least for me in Vertex and for the project, I believe that the value add of Vertex is not to be non-blocking or reactive. It's to be embeddable, to be very performant, and to be simple. And today, if you want to be highly scalable, you have to be non-blocking. If in the future we can do non-blocking with that, we will continue to do what we do. So I think all reactive frameworks will do. They will continue to exist. They will just provide synchronous API. I would say we use callback styles because we don't have the choice. We don't like it. I mean, well, we like it because we're used to, but we don't want to bother the world with that, right? Another question? No? Thank you.